So it seems like as artists, we move between a couple of different modes and missions, seeking to improve, wanting to complete big projects, and whatever sort of ball we want to make on the couch. I'm sure there's something big either driving you forward or at least in the back of your head that you'd like to make. Maybe it's a comic project, maybe it's a series of daily art pieces, maybe it's a game or some kind of animation. I wanted to talk about a few things to keep in mind as someone with a few such projects under their belt, and really quickly at the end talk about the big projects that I'm working on to give you some insight and provide something of a catch-up point, because a lot of people have been asking recently and I want to give them something to point to. Here are 5 ways to sustain the life of your creative project. So these things are usually passion projects, right? Well, let's talk about passion, because it's definitely something that you have before the start and at the beginning of your project, but as the hard work sets in, it's very easy for that passion to start to fade. Now, on one hand, I think it's worth mentioning that it's supernatural for this to happen. It's super normal for this to happen. The grass looks a whole lot greener when you're 75% of the way through a project, there's nothing but hard work left to do, and 9 times out of 10, you feel a certain way about the project you're currently doing because it's not perfect. What's happened is that the hypothetical dream project has turned into a concrete thing before your eyes, flaws, mistakes, and all. And all that's left is to put a lot of hard work into this thing that on a certain level you might hate right now. So an idea for something else floats by you, a different project, a different format or medium, and because of the state that you're in, anything else seems better. But really, it's the same thing happening again. You're seeing this shiny object of a new project as a flawless hypothetical. It's great that you want to give that new project a shot. So just briefly record your intent to do so, but absolutely keep moving forward with the hard work that you need to do to have something complete under your belt with the project you're currently working on. Finishing the last 25% or even 10% can probably be the toughest spot for any working creative. So definitely know that you aren't alone in that aspect. This is definitely one of those cases where it's worth fighting for something of value. Now, before you even get to that point, there's a few things that we can do to spread the weight around and make projects more sustainable, which we'll talk about next. So some of the most valuable work that you can do on a project is at the beginning, and one of the worst mindsets that you can have is one that's like, yeah, I'll figure that out when I get to it. Of course, you don't have to have every little thing planned out from the start, but as an example of what I mean, have you ever added a coat of paint to something in hopes that it would solve a problem underneath? Kind of like with this model of Jacqueline's key. This is the first time I've ever used EVA foam, and it looks passable from far away, but up close you can see the places where instead of cleaning it up, I thought that the Plastidip or the primer or the paint or the glossy coat would finally solve those imperfections. And in projects, 9 times out of 10, those things are like the princess and the pea, something that doesn't go away the more mattresses that you stack on top of it. Now, the problem with most beginner artists' work has to do with that initial sketch that they spent hours polishing, hoping that the paint will smooth things over or fix their mistakes or something that looks wonky. And the problems with most big projects are a lot like that. The things that you put off or don't address early that won't just magically go away. Now with Jack's Key, I wasn't working with the right tools for this work. For a comic project, it might be that you didn't do enough pre-production and don't really know what your character looks like from the side. With a daily project, it might be that you have ideas for the first 4 or 5 days in the series, but I'll figure out the rest when I get to it. These are the things that will not get better with age. Make sure that you address them. Speaking of planning in general, one of the hardest ways to complete a project is by starting at point A and then meandering your way to point B. Now this might look like sitting down to write your story, beginning on page 1, and not having any kind of planning in place. Now, of course, these things could always change, but it helps to have a more zoomed out plan that has an end in sight. So again, for a story, that might mean your plan for the ending, what you want the characters to go through, the main beats that you want to hit. You might even want to break things down by chapter. When I first was trying to make a success of my long-term storytelling, I made a big post-it note wall with the simple overall things that I wanted to happen in each of the 6 chapters, all working towards the ending in mind. Now, of course, things can change, but having that armature there can be a huge help. So this applies to more than just stories and planning out storytelling too. If you have something like an animation in mind, you can start with a few bigger post-its, if you will, the larger categories, things like writing, pre-production, the actual animation itself, post-production like editing, rendering, and compositing, all to give you a map of what you're working towards. Now, disclaimer, I don't know a whole lot about building bridges, but I think there's a big difference between just grabbing a pile of bricks and starting to build out over the side of a cliff and suspending lines from either side, slowly distributing the weight between both anchors of the bridge, but I'm just a simple man. I wouldn't know the first thing about birth and no bridges. Stands to mention it, as we do in just about every video along these lines, that's when it comes to planning and time. Set a realistic time goal for yourself, and then add at least 50% to that. You never know what complications will arise, what things will get in your way of spending time on it, and again, talking about passion, you might move a lot quicker early on when you're planning versus later on in the trenches. I've talked about minimum viable projects before, and I'm pretty sure I even mapped out what qualifies them in each medium, and even if you aren't trying to fit your project into the tiniest package, I think it could help to map out what this project entails. So are there 4 characters or 20? Is it set in one location or 12? There's something of a sliding scale for how expensive of a budget, swap out money for time if you're doing this yourself, that these projects can take. Now for a written story, you can easily fill 200 pages with words describing the most detailed, intricate, involved, hard to animate story. Now with a comic, you might spend the same amount of time on only a dozen or so pages, with limits to the amount of dialogue that you can fit, or scenes that you can successfully render. For animation, you might spend the same amount of time on even 30 seconds or 1 minute of playback. So even if you aren't aiming for tiny, try to plan realistically. If you've never animated before, single-handedly producing a feature-length film on your first try is going to take so long that it might be impossible. Now, I said at the beginning that as artists, we're cycling between this project ambition and wanting to learn, and I think projects are a great way to pick out one thing that you want to learn and use the project to teach it to yourself. There's nothing like that practical, hands-on learning that you get to see the results of afterwards. Just be careful that you're teaching yourself one thing and not 10 things. That's a really great way to overwhelm yourself and halt the project before it even starts. I know how ambitious these big projects can seem, and I do want to emphasize, if this video has you feeling down because you're just trying to survive right now, please don't be. This is by no means trying to give you any kind of guilt. Trust me, as much as I have managed to successfully maintain an output this year, to borrow an expression, this still duck on the water is doing a lot of kicking below the surface. This video is meant to help you if you are aspirational or want to channel that drive to make something a little more effectively. But if you need to take your output down a bit, by all means do so. So I have a lot of work on my plate aside from these 2 projects. The videos that you see every week take a ton of time. I have monthly projects like Pico's Backpack and commissions and client work. But when I'm able to, I am currently working on Shackleton and Stormfellers. Now, plenty more stories that I want to tell and things that I want to do, but for now, I'm focusing on these 2. Now, one of these is a collaboration with another person, and the other is largely my own. Shackleton is a video game Mark and I are developing about a lamb named Jacqueline, whose island home has been turned into a giant prison complex. She wields a giant key to liberate her fellow people that have been wrongfully locked up. We've been working on this for a while, and we essentially restarted development not too long ago. I know that a lot of people have been waiting for updates on this. We want to be able to show you something soon. Just please understand, especially with the past year, we've had some hiccups and delays, but are really excited to keep working on it, and we'll have something for you soon. Now, Stormfellers, on the other hand, is a project that does have a date in mind, and that date is 2021, this year, with a more concrete one coming. Stormfellers is a story set on an island that is plagued with frequent storms, and parties of intrepid adventurers from the Stormfellers Guild team up to take these storms down. Now, these teams have big tanks, specialists, and a very special creature called a storm conduit that can absorb the power of a storm. But instead of focusing on any of them, our story centers around the support class, a field medic named Biko. He's made of a healing goo, so he literally gives of himself to heal others. Now, on top of the fact that his job is nowhere near as flashy as everyone else's, the rest of his team is absolutely insufferable to be around. So I'm keeping some things about this project close to the chest because, as someone who releases new content every week, I like having some surprises in store. But I will say that I'll have some behind-the-scenes progress on this project available in this month's vlog, which is exclusive to patrons and newsletter subscribers, so make sure you're one of those. We also just had, the hour before this video went live, our first exclusive live stream, which is again just for patrons and newsletter subscribers. There's a new Biko's backpack for January featuring O'Leary, who you might remember from our Let's Design a Retro Game character video from a couple months ago. He's made another jump in generation from, say, the N64 era to the GameCube era in design. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and TikTok at BagelDenizen. Thank you so much for watching, and have fun creating.